Thank you once again, Ajay, for that introduction, and thank you, Khaki Lab folks, for this opportunity to speak about the city that is Hyderabad. It serves as a very important backdrop for my recent book that was just released a few months ago. Can I get to the first slide of Qutub Shahi beginnings, please? So the origins of what is today Telangana's capital, Hyderabad, date all the way back to the 16th century. The founder of the city was Muhammad Quli Qutub Shah, the fifth Qutub Shahi dynasty monarch, whose forefathers were originally from Hamadan, Iran. And in honor of the city he founded, this monarch, Quli Qutub Shah, wrote the following Dakkani couplet, which you can see on the screen. Mera shahar logan so mamur kar, rakhya jo tu darya mein minya sami. Fill up my city with people as you have done in a pond with fish. But legend has it that Hyderabad is a product of a romantic saga between star-crossed lovers. One of them was the exalted Quli Qutb himself. The other was Bhagmati, whom some considered a Devdasi, while others believed she was a Nautch girl. Yet, as per this legend, they overcame various royal and societal obstacles, and in honor of her, Quli Qutb Shah named the city as Bhagyanagar. But upon converting to Islam, she took on the name Hyder Mahal. And that is how the city came to be known as Hyderabad. Though, on a side note, many Hyderabadi old timers and scholars claim that Bhagmati never existed. One of them being prominent Deccan study stalwart Harun Khan Shirwani. But we won't get into that too much. Though I do highly recommend Mupia Basu's Westland published book, Bhagmati Why Hyderabad's Lost Queen is the Soul of the City. If one really wants to learn about the queen that was or wasn't, then this is the book to read. Towards the era of Muhammad Quli Qutb Shah's reign, the expansionist Mughal Empire under Aurangzeb Alamgir up north was looking to further establish its presence in the southern Deccan region after he conquered the Bijapur Sultanate in 1686. That was a big period of transition. So, a year later, after the conquering the Bijapur Sultanate, Aurangzeb Alamgir soon conquered the Golconda Sultanate. If anyone has ever been to Hyderabad to the Golconda Fort, the sound and light show, which showcases the Mughal besiegement of the fort, is quite the visual spectacle. I remember seeing it for the first time when I was about 6 years old. The second time I saw it was like in 2018. It was just as exquisite as the first. And then for about the next 4 decades, the Mughal changed things up by shifting the capital of their newly acquired territory from Hyderabad to Aurangabad. Only during the tenure of the next dynasty that ruled over the Deccan would Hyderabad city become the seat of power again. One of Aurangzeb's most able generals, whom he trained himself, Mir Khamaruddin Khan, was in charge of administering the new conquered territories down south. Soon enough, he would break away from the disintegrating Mughal Empire, and he did so because he had just had it with the harem politics and the squabbles that were taking place as the Mughal Empire was nearing its end. Thus, in 1724, he would form his own dynasty away from any Mughal oversight. This dynasty would be known as the Asaf Jahi dynasty. So the Asaf Jahi state in the central region of the Deccan was nominally independent under the first Nizam. Essentially, he transplanted the very Delhi culture he grew up in down south. So if an outsider feels shades of North India and Hyderabad today, the first Nizam is part of the reason why. One interesting fact about him is that he played a big role in putting an end to the barbaric plunder and loot that Nadir Shah of Sharid carried out up in Delhi in 1738. Interestingly enough, it didn't take any testosterone-fueled wielding of a sword or a stern command in a Prithviraj Kapoor-like voice to do this. Quoting Persian poet Hafiz Shirazi did the trick. And the lines he quoted which really brought out some sort of empathy in Nadir Shah, despite all the plunder he had inflicted upon Delhi. Where, O king, your anger has killed so many men. If you want to kill some more, bring them back to life again. And that did the trick. Upon his death, though, the first Nizam wrote a will in which he expressly asked his ruling family members not to quarrel amongst each other. He even insisted that the dynasty follow the path of pluralism, egalitarianism for their subjects. Of course, those succession struggles not only gave way to maladministration, but it also paved the way for external entities like the British and French to wield influence in the Deccan. During the second Nizam's time, the Asaf Jahi Empire is said to have also aided the British by not aiding Tipu Sultan's forces against the British. The third Nizam Sikandar Jah's tenure saw the birth of Hyderabad's twin city, which was named after Sikandar Jah himself. This city, known as Sikandrabad, which is now part of Hyderabad's greater municipal corporation dominions, was the cantonment area where where the British stationed their troops, and as did Hyderabad's army. Even today, one will see Sikandrabad is home to cantonment areas such as Bularam, Sainikpuri, etc. Prominent city and heritage expert Yunus Lasagna gave an excellent lecture for Khaki Lab on how Hyderabad's twin city came to be. That's a talk I highly recommend as well if you haven't seen that. But before I move on to the eras of the third and fourth Nizams, I'd like to add that this was also a time when pure Urdu and Persian were sidelining local languages and dialects. The Qutub Shahi period saw the mingling of Urdu, Persian, Telugu, and other languages. And even this Dakkani, which Hyderabad city people and people within present day Maharashtra and even Karnataka speak, that really came to be much before the Nizam dynasty. So but as a result of the Asaf Jahi's coming to power, the older Dakkani was then relegated to homes with pure Persian and eventually pure Urdu, becoming the premier educational and government languages. And who did the earlier Nizams bring to help run the administration as advisors, bureaucrats, and court officials? They brought in Kayast Hindus who were very adept at Persian and Urdu. This importing of talent continued well during the tenures of the subsequent Nizams. And this flight of talent from North India and Punjab continued during the fourth Nizam Nasruddaulah and his successor Afzaluddaullah's reigns. But during those Nizam's reigns, the Prime Minister Salar Jung, whose real name was Turab Ali Khan, was the one in the driver's seat. He brought in a lot of kayas because the indigenous population, specifically that of the districts, weren't empowered, and the ruling classes, namely the aristocracy, were mostly just enjoying the fruits of the tributes that came from the backbreaking labor of the peasantry. And while Salarjung might have gotten government spending under control, much to the dismay of the opulent Paigas, who were at the highest level of the aristocratic strata, the paramount British power, who hovered above the Asaf Jahis, too considered Salarjung the most dangerous man in all of India due to his independent mindedness. I mean, colonials, they'll definitely want people who, want a lot of princely rulers who do help administer, get them taxes. But people who are too independent for the British, they were seen as very much suspect, and Salar Jung was no different. Though despite these positive contributions, he too ultimately kept the feudal systems intact. And this couldn't have been possible without the help of the Hindu gentry within the Telangana districts of princely Hyderabad. Yes, these reforms by Salar Jungs did, make streamlined governance, but ultimately the landlord known as the Dora in the districts, he might have even lost the power to collect revenue due to Jung's reforms, especially with the Patwari now being in charge of revenue collection. But at the end of the day, the big bad Dora remained the law of the land in the districts. No dispute could be solved without his blessing, whether it was an extended family dispute that people took to the Dora or even land disputes. And this represents to me a very dark side of princely Hyderabad. After all, this was a state where the Muslim Asaf Jahi elite, along with certain co-opted strata of the Hindu majority, ended up calling the shots. Though when it came to Urdu poetry, literature, and the cosmopolitan culture of the city, not necessarily the districts, the sixth Nizam, Mir Mehboob Ali Khan, is remembered till this day. His reign is remembered as a time where Hindus, Sikhs, Parsis, and Muslims and Christians held the sixth Nizam Mehboob Ali Pasha in high esteem. And this was a monarch who was known to be munificence defined. Whether it was opening the coffers to renowned Urdu poets from the north like Dag Dehelvi or Amir Binai, or just simply showering passers-by is with Ashrafi coins. His generosity can be summed up through these lines that Dag wrote about his benefactor, and you can see these on your screen. Ki meri qadr misle Shah Dakkan. किसी नवाब ने ना राजा ने. No other feudal or ruler has patronized me the way that the Shah of the Dakkan has done so. And the Shah of the Dakkan, as mentioned is Mehboob Ali Pasha. Though Mehboob Ali Pasha's son Usman Ali Khan, he was the final and seventh Nizam. He did continue this patronage of Urdu literature and learning. And without Usman Ali Khan's backing, Usmania University, the first institution to dispense education in a vernacular language, wouldn't have come into existence. But Usman Ali Khan would be the last ruler of his kingdom that his forefather Mir Kamaluddin Khan formed. Because the decades leading up to independence come partition were some tumultuous ones with so much political intrigue. The journeys of the families I chronicle in my book begin from this period. And as independence and partition neared, princely states couldn't remain aloof of what had been going on in the provinces directly administered by the British. Yes, they might have been semi-independent or autonomous, but eventually the bordering provinces that were next to these princely states, the political intrigue that happened in those provinces were soon to make their presence felt in the princely states as well. The Indian National Congress and the Muslim League had established their presence in the Dogra dynasty ruled Jammu and Kashmir. Sure, while Maharaja Hari Singh and Usman Ali Khan had their excellent qualities, both failed to take stock of the realities about their regimes and the changing times that came about as the people of India began their struggle against the British. And at the end of the day, be it Kashmir or Hyderabad, these were exploitative regimes that ultimately flourished at the expense of the majority population of each state. And there were different factions that represented the aspirations of the people. Though before I get into that, uh, please do take a look at the map of princely Hyderabad on your screen. And you can see that, some of these districts, specifically ones that contain Aurangabad, Bir, Parbhani, or even Gulbarga or Raichur. These were very contagious to the Mysore presidency and the Bombay presidency. And when the Congress formed a government in the Bombay presidency, they too helped spear satyagraha uh, within the satyagraha in the Nizam state. And these places, these cities that bordered the what is present day Maharashtra, they too were contagious to all the activity, the political activity going on in the Bombay presidency. In the same way, the Muslims of Jammu got help from the neighboring Punjab province, which was also a Muslim League stronghold, and they got that help for their anti-Dogra dynasty struggle. Likewise, the Marathi and Kannada speaking Hyderabadis, who were mostly Hindu, looked to the Congress factions in the neighboring Bombay presidency and the Mysore presidency. Though there were pro Congress Muslims like Shoaibullah Khan, he was the editor of the Imroz newspaper. Although within the Telangana districts of Hyderabad, the communist strand of the anti Nizam struggle was the resistance faction that held the sway. The Telugu districts of the neighboring Madras presidency province, which were attuning their Telugu-speaking brethren of Hyderabad to the leftist ideology that had overthrown the Tsar in Russia. In the Telugu districts, the bordering the bordering Telugu parts of the Madras presidency, Madras presidency province, they were playing the same role with the Telugus of Telangana that the Marathis of Bombay presidency were playing with the Marathi-speaking provinces of Hyderabad. But it wasn't just the peasants of the districts who were rallying workers of the world to unite, as per Marx's clarion call. Even scions of well-off families in the city were getting exposed to Marxist ideals at renowned educational institutions, namely Osmania University and City College. By 1946, the anti-feudal and thereby anti-Nizam struggle in the districts had turned into an armed one. However, the seeds for communal tensions in princely Hyderabad had already been laid much before this freedom struggle or even the leftist struggle had caught steam. So the communal tensions that gave way to this animosity between Hindus and Muslims in the Hyderabad state. It can be attributed to these two organizations, the MIM, the Majlis Ittihad al-Muslimin, and the Arya Samaj. The Arya Samaj was formed in the Marathi-speaking districts of Hyderabad in 1891, but the organization officially came to the city a year later. The Majlis Ittihad al-Muslimin, though, was formed uh, 2, 3 decades later in 1927. These two groups and their ideologues, whose photos, one of whose photos you can see on the right, Nawab Bahadur Yar Jung and Pandit Narendra Ji, they had foils in each other. But it was but one of Bahadur Yar Jung's successors named Qasim Razvi would play a huge role in bringing havoc to the doorstep of the Deccan. As both communists and the Hyderabad State Congress were ratcheting up the pressure for the Nizam to join the Indian Union, Usman Ali Khan, on the other hand, dithered regarding a decision about the future of his state post August 15, 1947, and as did Maharaja Hari Singh of Jammu and Kashmir. But as you can see in this slide, the guy on the left of this screen didn't really help with his rhetoric against the Indian government and violence towards those who were even remotely sympathetic to the less belligerent elements within the Hyderabad State Congress. Because certain Congress factions were also spearheading raids into Hyderabad's Marathi-speaking districts. The Razakars, which is the militia wing of the Majlis Ittihad al-Muslimin, did what they could to counter those raids and those spearheading them. But of course, in the process, violence ensued. And boy, did the Razakars run riot over the countryside. However, the Indian government was simply tired of Razvi's rhetoric and his sabotaging of different breakthroughs made both by New Delhi and Nizam ruled Hyderabad. Though between Sardar Patel and Jawaharlal Nehru, Nehru was the more pacifist of the two. However, the killing of Shoaibullah Khan, the Congress-leaning Urdu newspaper Imroz's editor, even India's prime minister, the pacifist, had troops agreed to having troops marched into Hyderabad. Of course, the Razakars and the paltry Hyderabad army stood no chance whatsoever against the mighty Indian army. I mean, what chance does a small army, that too one which was very much patronized by the British, what chance did that paltry army have against soldiers who fought in Indian soldiers who fought in World War II and were already in the midst of a war against Pakistan? But that period also saw the massacres of a lot of Muslims, sometimes on the mere pretext that they were Razakars. The Pandit Sundarlal Committee report, which Nehru had commissioned after 1948, elaborates on the atrocities that took place when the troops marched in. This is seen as quite the tragedy amongst those of aristocratic stock, as it meant the end of the Asif Jai setup. Many political Muslims, both from the nobility and the ordinary apolitical stratum, didn't want things to play out this way. Though had the Nizam shown the signature foresight that he was famous for, he probably would have negotiated favorable terms for accession, especially when Jawaharlal Nehru offered 40% representation to Muslims in the new Hyderabad State Assembly. A.G. Noorani's The Destruction of Hyderabad is one of the few but great books which elaborate on this phase. Though in the past few years, there's been a surge of journalists, filmmakers, and heritage activists, one of whose names I just mentioned, and they've begun shedding light upon this best kept secret in the annals of the subcontinent's history. And this best kept secret is the police action itself, which led to the accession of Nizam ruled Hyderabad to the newly independent Indian Union. But India's military action had another facet to it, and that was to quell the Telangana peasant rebellion in the Telugu-speaking districts of Hyderabad state. So Hyderabad, which was described as the ulcer in the belly of India, had been cured of that ailment, but only halfway through the police action. With the Nizam then having acceded to the Union and the troops having entered Hyderabad, the numerous villages under communist rule posed a threat to the Congress establishment. Because, like I said, the leftist struggle in the Telangana districts of Hyderabad, they were mostly contagious to the Madras president, the Telugu-speaking portions of the Madras presidency, which was inculcating leftist values in them. The Congress didn't have much hold in the Telangana districts. Rather, it was the leftist factions that were spearheading a different kind of resistance against the Nizam. Plus, now that the leftist guerrillas had a new enemy in the Congress establishment with the Nizam deposed, the fighting raged on till 1951, with casualties mounting very much for the Telangana districts. In his book Telangana People's Struggle and Its Lessons, Andhra leftist stalwart Sundaraya elaborates on the high-handedness of the Indian Army. The Communist Party and outside of Hyderabad, the Communist Party of India General Secretary B.T. Ranadive believed that this newly gained independence was a sham. However, there emerged a contingency that looked to call the armed struggle off. Because the armed struggle, mostly the Andhra contingencies were for the armed struggle continuing. These two conflicting contingencies decided to send a delegation consisting of Ajoy Ghosh, S.A. Dange, Makineni Basavapunaya, and Rajeshwar Rao to the Russian Common Forum. Stalin told them to call off the armed struggle so that they could pursue the cause within the ambit of the Indian Constitution, because the Soviet Union, with the respect to their foreign policy, they wanted strong ties with the Congress establishment, and a lot of the pro keep a lot of these factions and leaders who wanted to keep the armed struggle going, they wouldn't short circuit the rhetoric of Jawaharlal Nehru being a bourgeois, but Nehru wanted to cultivate relationship. Sorry, Stalin wanted to cultivate relations with Nehru and the new Indian establishment, which is why he advised them to call the armed struggle off. And that's exactly what happened. While the police action and Telangana rebellion were in the rearview mirror, the 1950s were very much a period of churn and transition. And there's one couplet which I commenced my book with by Dr. Mohiuddin Khadri Zor, who's a subject as well for my book. These lines perfectly capture that churn or that uncertainty that came about after 1948 and the 51. Shiraz Bahar Gule Tar Bikhar Gaya. अब किसको बताए जेबे चमन है कौन? कश्मीर में कोई तो कराची में है कोई. ए जोर पूछे किससे अहले दक्कन है कौन? So Zor, tell me who the people of Dakkan are. So this is a time where identities are shifting, setup, and that new setup is bringing about a certain amount of nervousness in people. So so this is where I'll get to the aftermath and how people ended up dealing with it. For Muslims, a lot but not all of whom who had it good in princely Hyderabad, it took a while to come to terms with this new democratic setup. The aristocratic elite, especially, had to make peace with the fact that the landed income would not be accessible anymore to them with land reform taking place. Even the apolitical, non-noble class of professional Muslims, which my paternal grandfather belonged to, they knew that things were about to change. The government jobs that Muslims had a virtual monopoly over were also not going to come so easy anymore. Those who were actual foot soldiers of the Telangana rebellion, on the other hand, and those who survived that armed conflict, they went back to their traditional occupations. Though the Hindu population of the state still had the Razakar episode etched in their minds, because Razakars weren't exactly also guiltless of of a lot of atrocities as well before police action. So as you can see, amidst this period of what is sadness and transition, the joy of gaining freedom from the British was not only dampened by partition, but even more so by police action and the Telangana Armed Rebellion. Plus, Osmania University, the country's first vernacular institution, it was shed of its Urdu identity as well. Official government gazette notifications that were once disseminated in Urdu were now being put out in English instead. And a lot of the folks who only knew how to read and write Urdu, that really put them in a bind as well too. What were they going to do? They either had to learn English or find something else to do, because the government jobs were now requiring English more so than Urdu. Though to help transition into a new democratic era, especially with communal wounds still not healed, the leftist factions of Hyderabad were allowed to regroup under a new party known as the People's Democratic Front. And in keeping with Jawaharlal Nehru's desire to nurture a democratic spirit by having an opposition with the leftist factions, Hyderabad's communists served as a very powerful opposition to the Congress. These leftists patronized a lot of cultural production in the form of humorous as well as serious poetry and a lot of music. A major center for this activity was the bachelor's quarters building, as you can see on your screen, right besides the Mozam Jahi market. This is also where the PDF and the CPI when the ban was lifted is after. The CPI and the PDF carried out a lot of campaigning here, and to also halt the exodus of a Muslim population that was unsure of what lay ahead for them in democratic India, but at the same time, while also doing their bit to keep Urdu alive. The newspaper Siyasat was formed by Adil Ali Khan, a progressive who belonged to a landed family. He and co-founder Mehboob Hussain Jigar wanted their newspaper to be a bridge between the Muslim population, who was unsure of what lay ahead of them, and the new Congress establishment. But there was more political intrigue in store for the people of Hyderabad city and state. So as early as 1952, there had been an influx of people from the Telugu-speaking parts of Madras presidency, and they were seen as people who were monopolizing government jobs. While the Telangana region's Telugu-speaking Hindus had welcomed the ouster of the Nizam, this Telugu-speaking part of that had been becoming a part of the establishment was more educated, and they had also brought with them a lot of financial capital. The Telugu and these are the Telugu-speaking folks of the Madras presidency. They were more educated than the Telangana Telugus, and they brought a lot of capital. Though, despite speaking the same language, the Telugu spoken by the Telangana Telugus and the Madras presidency Telugus, who I'll also refer to as Andhra Telugus, they might have even spoken the same language, but their cultural attributes are very different. Even their dialects of Telugu are very different. But this is when the son of the soil versus the outsider debate had begun setting in between the two. And that dynamic was to define these two different populations for the next few decades. In 1952, the early Andhra Telangana iteration had begun in Warangal, which is about 150 kilometers away from Hyderabad city, through a student demonstration. Idli Samar Go Back were among the many slogans chanted by Mulkis, Hindus, Mulkis. And these Mulkis were both Hindus and Muslims. Yet, these Telugu speakers from Madras presidency ended up with their own state due to the death of Putti Sriramulu, and his death is seen as the harbinger of the linguistic division of states in India. Because in 1953, the state would break away from Madras presidency with Kurnool as its capital. This would be known as Andhra state. Soon enough, it would merge with the Telugu-speaking portion of Hyderabad, and then it would be called Andhra Pradesh in 1956. And Hyderabad city would be its capital. However, there remained a lot of skepticism from Telanganites, like the second and last chief minister of Hyderabad state, Burgulla Ramakrishna Rao. And this is why the gentleman's agreement between Telangana and Andhra state leaders was signed before the formation of Andhra Pradesh. And as late as the 50s and as late as the 50s and as the 60s went on, the Majlis Ittihadul Muslimin, the parent organization of the banned Razakars, had been gaining ground in municipal elections. Many older Hyderabadi leftists attribute this to Congress wheeling and dealing of wanting to destroy the communists, who by then were allowed to carry out electoral and political activity under the original CPI banner. For Bombayites here, parallel this patronizing of the MIM by the Congress to neutralize the the communists. A parallel can be drawn between VP Naik's patronage via the Congress, between VP Naik's patronage to the Congress, patronage to the Shiv Sena to neutralize the trade unions of the city. But with Qasim Razvi having left for Pakistan, he bequeathed the organization to Abdul Wahid Owaisi, the grandfather of current All India Majlis Ittihad al-Muslimin's head, Asaduddin Owaisi. But disenchantment with the new ruling Andhra establishment had set in, thereby giving way to the first Telangana movement. And as that gained traction, the MIM would abstain from participating in this pivotal struggle because the Andhra Pradesh government had promised them to return full possession of their headquarters in Darussalam, the MIM headquarters in Darussalam to them, which had been confiscated after the party's antics under Qasim Razvi's leadership. Next slide, please. So this first iteration of the Telangana struggle was essentially a continuation of the Mulki versus non-Mulki conflict. Of course, there was the exploitation of resources such as water from the new Andhra establishment. But in 1960, the Kottagudem thermal power plant debacle is one of many examples of how the Andhra dispensation generally viewed the Telangana region. And only 200 of the 1,400 were from Telangana. Workers of that thermal power plant were from Telangana. Soon, 175 of those 200 were retrenched. And between 1958 and 1968, 10 polytechnic colleges were established in the Andhra region, whereas Telangana just had to suffice with just 2. The Telangana non-gazetted officers too cast this union known as the Telangana non-gazetted officers. Weren't exactly the NGO, the non-gazetted officers too cast their law as government jobs weren't exactly accessible to them as they were as these jobs were ultimately being taken by Andhrites. For about a year, as a result of this struggle, life came to a standstill in Hyderabad city. My father, he even tells me stories about how he lost a year from his university when pursuing his bachelor's degree. And even one of my dad's maternal uncles, when he came back from Bombay to work in Hyderabad, he too had to sit at home for a little while, and his construction business couldn't get off the ground. And by the time it had gotten off the ground, another real estate lobby had been, taking over the city. But other than the citywide shutdowns, 369 people were killed as a result of these protests. However, Marichanna Reddy, the head of the Telangana Praja Samiti, which spearheaded this struggle on a political level, he is said to have cut a deal with Indira Gandhi to end the struggle. The TPS party would then merge into the Congress with Reddy, thereby laying the groundwork for his eventual chief ministership of Andhra Pradesh. Till this day, Reddy is kind of seen as as somebody who sold out the struggle for his own ambitions. However, there were also many prominent Telanganites like Chukka Ramaiah, the famous IIT coach, that also participated in the Telangana rebellion, who at the time didn't feel that separate statehood would bode well for the ordinary citizenry. For him, the landed Telanganite stratum, which people like him fought against during the armed rebellion, was more of a threat than the Andhraite dispensation. Plus, when I spoke to him, he mentioned that there was a contingency of educationists who came from Madras throughout the 50s and were all about empowering Telanganites. So Ramaiah was one of my subjects who offered a more nuanced view of the Andhraite population that came in during the 1950s. For him, and I also agree that not all of them were, commercial land grabbers of sorts. That too, especially since, and he felt that way because a lot of Telanganites had been deprived of education and empowerment during the Nizam era. Although the struggle became dormant, Hyderabad city continued to be a hotbed of socio-political and socio-economic transformation. With the push for statehood no longer a driving force among the students of Osmania, because Osmania was a major bastion of for where the banner of Telangana had been raised. The Naxalism that was growing filled that void. OU had then become a center of leftism. However, it is also said among older folks in the city that the rightward end of the political spectrum also helped fill that void. The Bharatiya Jan Sangh also made inroads through the Ganesh Chaturthi celebration. Before the 1970s, Ganpati celebrations, they're almost non-existent, but under Bharatiya Jan Sangh stalwart Tiger Narendra, they became a mainstay of the city. And soon enough, there emerged a site of a growing temple, which at first was just a stone, a stone. As per academic Ali Asghar engineer, an angry Muslim bus driver rammed the bus into that stone, creating a huge communal conflict. That and the rape of a Muslim woman named Ramiza Bibi by policemen uh, led to curfews around the cities. One of my subjects who was born in Hyderabad mentioned this era as a turning point for post-independence Hyderabad. This was also a point where a lot of Hyderabadis, and that too mostly Muslims, begin migrating to Gulf countries like Saudi Arabia. Oil money in Saudi Arabia brought about rapid development, but with the Saud kingdom's indigenous population lacking the know-how, education, and in certain cases, the work ethic, many Hyderabadis went to make their living in Saudi Arabia as electricians, engineers, and etc. Of course, a lot of religious practices specific to Saudi Arabia, both good and both good and bad, were imported too. But it wasn't just remittances or certain religious practices that were entering Hyderabad. But this is exactly why one will see a lot of places where shawarmas and mandi joints are available in Hyderabad today. And these are among the culinary imports from the Gulf that one can find in Hyderabad. And shawarma joints have just proliferated a lot. Although ones that serve mayonnaise, which I think are not really authentic, it's have also made their presence felt. But these to me are quite the imports because Hyderabadis and Telanganites are known to be very, very particular about the food that they eat. And the katta, the sour, bitter palate, is very much preferred among them. So I think the shawarma and the mandi, it's quite the phenomenon that the city has accepted this food and it's taken to a lot of these culinary traditions of the Gulf. Though during the 1980s, a new political party emerged as a rival to the Rayalaseema Congress, to the Rayalaseema Congress faction of Andhra Pradesh. This coastal Andhra party was known as the Telugu-Desam Party. The inhabitants from coastal Andhra had also been pumping a lot of their capital into Hyderabad city. As I mentioned, a lot of these folks who were from what was were from what was once Madras Presidency, they came with a lot of capital. However, be it the political slash commercial elite of Rayalaseema or coastal Andhra, not only were they about unequal distribution of water from rivers such as the Godavari or Krishna, Hyderabad city was also home to the former crown lands uh, of the long deposed Asaf Jahi dynasty. So rather than, aside from water resources, these lands were also, being claimed underhandedly by the political and commercial elite. Schedule 5 lands for the scheduled tribes weren't spared either. And Gautam Pingal, he mentions this in one of his articles. He's a prominent Telangana academic. Another aspect of Hyderabad's real estate industry is the formal linkage to political leadership, often from regions in Andhra Pradesh. For example, Lanco, an infrastructure and real estate company, is associated with Lagdapatti Rajgopal, an MP from Vijayawada. The Gayatri construction firm is associated with T. Subiram Reddy, a former MP from Vishakhapatnam, and Transtroy, a firm involved in building the outer ring road, is associated with the Rayapati Sambaseva Rao, the MP from Guntur. Quite the quite the quite the take on public-private partnerships, as we can see. I mean, Hyderabad's existence as a tech hub definitely does owe a lot of efforts to the TDP's Chandrababu Naidu and how he courted foreign investment and the way he built the infrastructure for high tech city. However, ever since the Qutub Shahi era, scientific and innovation, scientific innovation and scientific temperaments had very much been part of Hyderabad city and the Deccan's DNA. Dinesh Sharma's excellent book Beyond Biryani chronicles how the foundation for the rapid development of the 1990s to and the 2000s had been laid during the eras of medieval Deccan sultanates and before the formation of AP. For instance, software developments, software developments had already begun at the Administrative Staff College of India, which was formed in 1956, just right when AP was formed. Usmania University, being a major center of knowledge upon its formation as a Urdu medium in 1918, that also lent a very educational and scientific character to Hyderabad. Again, I can't recommend Dinesh Sharma's book enough for a great institutional and scientific history of Hyderabad. And there was also a very cultural aspect to the hegemony of the Andhrites as well. The Telangana, the Telugu film industry, for the most part, was dominated by coastal Andhra elites, and it was their culture that kept being featured prominently. And Telangana culture was very much looked down upon. But the man who capitalized on this sentiment was none other than a native of the Siddipet district of Telangana. This person who gauged the sentiments is none other than Kalvakuntla Chandrasekhar Rao. Interestingly enough, he was a TDP loyalist in the beginning. That too, one who named his son KTR after the TDP founder himself, Nandamuri Tarka Rama Rao. This sentiment for a new state, though, had always been brewing, and the BJP very well might have been the first to formally articulate this demand for a new state in the 1990s. However, when KCR split from the TDP, he formed the Telangana Rashtriya Samiti in 2004. Though known today as the Bharatiya Rashtriya Samiti, this party had been formed with the intention of bringing the Telangana state to fruition. The strikes and Bandh that had brought Hyderabad cities to a standstill surfaced again. But besides the Bandhs, Hyderabad city saw protests that were better organized and definitely more populated than the ones that happened in 1969. On November 29th, 2009, KCR did begin his fast onto the death. The suicide of a student who set himself on fire for the Telangana struggle on the same day prompted people to take further notice. I mean, of course, the TRS's and Congress's political wheeling and dealing helped take the cause forward. But organizing these mass level protests and spreading the word wouldn't have been possible without the Telangana Joint Action Committee. The JSC ended up as a coalition of academics, activists, leaders, and journalists who came together for this cause. Professor Kodanram was the one who ended up heading this coalition. Today, one can see that he's a MLC in Telangana legislature. And one interesting fact of the Telangana struggle goes beyond the cultural and economic hegemony of the Andhra establishment. The Telangana elites simply there's definitely just a lot when it comes to just getting the old lands that the Andhra elite had also taken over. That ultimately was a major facet of the Telangana struggle. The Telangana elite simply were just out to a lot of the Telangana elite were just out to upend the Andhra elite for the Sarfe Khas lands that had been taken over by the Rayalaseema and coastal Andhra folks who I mentioned, whom I elaborated upon in the previous slide. But come 2004, Hyderabad city would become the capital of a newly formed Telangana state. And as of last year, it is no longer the capital of Andhra Pradesh. But amidst a lot of celebration and promise, the Telangana state was formed. But as the 2018 elections showed, the sentiment of the 2000 municipal election, the 2000 election showed the sentiment of delivering Telangana their own state and having Hyderabad and having wrested Hyderabad from the Andhrites was very well intact because in 2018, KCR's TRS came in with a thumping majority. However, ultimately, KCR didn't turn out to be all different from the Andhrites and the Asafjai dynasty before them. One of my subjects even mentioned that he and his family, while they might have been happy with their language and their culture of Telangana coming to the fore, especially with the Batkamma festival being celebrated a lot, this this festival, this Batkamma festival, it's specifically only to the Telangana region. It would only be celebrated inside the four walls of someone's home during the Andhra Pradesh days. But in 2014, one could see Batkamma lamps festooning the road dividers of the city. Unfortunately, KCR's son even, fraternized with the very Andhra film fraternity that lampooned Telangana culture. That being said, the Telangana dialect did begin to be featured more prominently in Tollywood movies like Mallesham. This sentiment is what allowed KCR to come to power in Telangana, both in 2014, in the 2014 and 2018 elections. KCR did bring back a very feudal style of government, not just to Hyderabad city, but to the newly formed, to the Telangana state as well. And one of the first signs that this Jai Telangana sentiment was wearing off, electorally speaking, was the Hyderabad municipal elections of 2020. And while the TRS might have averted a loss, the BJP turned out to be a force to be reckoned with. However, KCR had clearly become the new princely feudal ruler of this age, except that it was entities close to KCR, and these were entities whose forefathers happened to be a part of the landed co-opted Telugu-speaking strata during the Nizam's days. And ultimately, it was these folks who were benefiting from the newly created state, while the common man, things just remained the same for him. But with the 2020 Greater Hyderabad Municipal Corporation election came an early referendum regarding KCR. But the bigger referendum came against him with the Congress Party's victory in the 2023 Assembly elections elections where KCR was ousted out of power and Revant Reddy became the new chief minister. And during the research for my book, I came across two excerpts from Karen Leonard's book. She's a ethnographer, California-based ethnographer who's done some good work on the Kayast community of Hyderabad. And in the third edition of her book, she adds an extra chapter on her excellent case study of the Mathur subcaste of Kayast in Hyderabad. And I feel like these excerpts alone indicate of how the city's social and political character are both undergoing some rather interesting transformations. The excerpt on the right is an anonymous quote from an older Mathur Hyderabadi. He said in that anonymous survey to Leonard, however, there's a divergence and polarization that has happened in the past 20 to 30 years due to the rise of the right-wing thought and politics on both the Hindu and Muslim sides and globalization. There's more hardline conservative thinking due to influence from the Middle East and specifically Saudi Arabia, where many Hyderabadi Muslims live, which we don't like at all. Like a significant portion of the educated Indian middle class, many Mathurs have become supporters of the RSS and BJP on the Hindu right. Though on the left, the younger generation has some rather fascinating thoughts about the past and the present as well too. Though the circumstances have changed since 1948, we have not woken up to the new reality. Living on the largesse of the Nizam for long, we imbibed a lot of cultural traits from the Nizam and ignored our native past. This new generation is now questioning that and changing its style. The Nizams and Razakars have inflicted a lot of pain on the Hindus of Telangana. It is time to shed that legacy and move ahead. Next slide, last one, please. But regardless of what the future holds for Hyderabad, the city has been consistently rated as the best city to live in for the past 6 years. But it isn't only the institutions, the political history, and big and the big figures that constitute a city's past and its lore. People figure heavily into this as well. This isn't to say that state slash mainstream narrative should be ignored, but sometimes asking the big questions in little places outside the corridors of powers has its advantages. After all, a people's history of sort can supplement the history that we are taught in textbooks, or that history which is also being disseminated to pop culture. And that was ultimately the impetus behind writing the Hyderabadis from 1947 to the present day. And on that note, I'd like to end with a little share. हैदराबाद क्या है ये हमसे पूछो, अहले दिल, अहले नजर, अहले कलम से पूछो. What is Hyderabad, you ask? Look no further than look no further than look no further than compassionate souls. Look no further than to people. Look no further than to compassionate souls, people of vision, and wordsmiths for the answer. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Danish. That was really thoughtful and eye-opening. Sort of a walk through Hyderabad's many layers. I think you've really helped us see the city in a way that's, I think, both for you personal and sort of political, rooted in history, but also very much alive today. Uh, there's a lot that you said that really makes you think. But I'm sure others have questions as well. But I'll start with a few and then we'll open it up for everyone else to jump in. This couplet, and also the earlier one that you talked about, which, the question is, who is Dakkani anymore? Really sparked sort of two questions in my mind. I'll ask them separately. The first, is that Hyderabad has kind of worn many hats over time, right? Royal city, cultural adda, IT hub, and it's all been shaped by different kinds of people. I mean, there's Telugu speakers, there's, Urdu influence, Muslims, Dakkanis, tech migrants. So according to you, which of these layers, if you could identify that, which of these layers has really stuck and perhaps shaped the city the most? And I guess I'll go back to the question, which is really what you addressed through the couplet, which is, with so many influences, what does it really mean to be a true Hyderabadi anymore? Is it something people still feel, or is it more of a kind of a memory now?
Thank you for that question, Ajay. So let me answer that firstly by telling you what Jawaharlal Nehru said about Hyderabad. He said Hyderabad is a microcosm of India. And while Jawaharlal Nehru Saab, he may not have liked the exploitative feudal culture, the feudal aspect, the feudal character of Hyderabad state, he loved its culture. Linguistic linguistic extremism has always been alien to Hyderabad's spirit. And that's why I also said, like, while everybody likes to extol the Nizam a little to the Asaf Jahi dynasty a little too much, and while I'm all for bringing the excellent aspects of that out, there's a reason I also mentioned that, local languages were sidelined. Even Dakkani, forget about just making this a Urdu versus Telugu slash Marathi slash Kannada debate. Even Dakkani, घर की जबान बन गई थी. This is what a, uh, a prominent Urdu journalist and editor of a humor magazine told me. He said, with the advent of the Mughal slash the Asaf Jahis, Dakkani became a घर की जबान, and it was more pure Urdu and Persian that were being spoken at the higher levels of government and education. So, and it took a while for Dakkani poetry to come back. The Dakkani Urdu poetry, and that too humor poetry specifically, made a return after 1948. So I don't think any identity has a monopoly on, Hyderabad or the Dakkan. Of course, in such polarizing times, you'll have people, trying to say, no, this was our quote unquote native culture. This wasn't. And I think Dakkan culture has always, despite its, it might have had the Dakkan's history might have certain unsavory elements about it, but, the Dakkani language, the religious syncretism, a lot of dargahs you can find in Marathwada today. That I think it's what represents the multi-layered cosmopolitan nature of Hyderabad city and the Deccan. I would suggest watching Gautam Pedmaraju's documentary, A Tongue Untied. He devotes a certain chunk of not just to the Dakkani language, but just the Urdu humor poetry and the linguistic slash religious syncretism that Dakkani helped bring about.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you kind of partially answered the second question I had also, but I'm going to ask you just to make sure that we've covered it. So it was more about language shift, and I guess what is the role that Hyderabad still plays in keeping sort of the culture and poetry alive, Urdu, Dakkani. So what are we losing with this language shift in terms of cultural nuance? And actually, more than nuance, can Dakkani survive without the Urdu that it leans on?
It's a great question. I mean, Dakkani, I think it's not being in danger of being cannibalized by, pure Urdu or pure Hindi. Because as we see, North India, a lot of Hindi, if if one wants to call them that, dialects, have that's been the case with them, with those different dialects or languages, as others would like to convince them. But I don't think for now Dakkani is in danger of being cannibalized. And plus, Dakkani doesn't really the script. Urdu script is not really in vogue. The street signs, yes. The metro might have, English, Telugu, Hindi, and Urdu scripts. You'll see the signs of the station and all those. But Hyderabad, despite having Urdu as its second government language, as I write in my book about, the Urdu circles, how a certain amount of, political politics and leg pulling has contributed to the downfall of Urdu. That too, amidst English become more of the language that promotes a socioeconomic advancement. So for now, we're good, but I think not a lot of youth read the Urdu script here. There might be certain, I mean, there has been a certain, a proliferation of organizations that are enticing people towards the poetry and the culture of Urdu, but whether they're inclining them towards script, which I think is what's needed to keep the languages alive outside the elite ghazal circles or well curated festivals. So yeah, I think Dakkani is fine, but Urdu language, that's I think that's very up in the air. I hope that answers your question, Ajay.
Sure, yeah. So I'm just going to take some of the comments and questions that are there from the folks participating here. Um, Yashpal asked the question, who built the Falaknama Palace? Actually, Jyoti Kerkar says, my question too.
The Falaknuma Palace. That was Asmaja's. Like, he was a noble, Asmaja. He was a part of the Paiga aristocracy. So the Falaknuma Palace, it was his actually. It was his residence. So interesting story about that. Uh, the sixth Nizam, he was invited to uh, that palace uh, at that palace, right? So this noble, he invited him, wined and dined him, but Mehboob Ali Pasha wouldn't leave. He actually spent like a few weeks there, and the noble, he got he got the message. He said, "Chalo ab de do unko if agar अगर निजाम सरकार यहाँ पे बैठे हुए हैं and he's basically not leaving, that's my cue to give him the palace. So then it became the Nizam's residence. So yeah, so it was Asma Jaz, but then the sixth Nizam kind of took it from him.
Okay. There's some comments here. Naveen Vora says, quite a comprehensive history of Hyderabad. Surya Teja says, excellent talk, Danish. Thank you.
Thanks, Surya.
Um, Karen says, excellent. Thank you. So, Yashpal asks a question. What about the history of pearls?
I don't know too much about the how the pearls came about, how it became a center, but I will tell you this interesting story. An interesting anecdote which I was told by Mir Ayub Ali Khan. He's one of my subjects in the book, and I chronicle his interesting trajectory from his family's interesting trajectory from 48 to more contemporary times. He told me that that these jewelry shops, if anybody's been to Charminar, Pathargatti, Machli Kaman, there's this line of jewelry shops that leads to the Charminar. And a lot of them you'll see they're run by Hindus. जैसा बजरंग की दुकान, Bajrang Prasad Jewelers, Suraj Bhan. So the Nizam had called a lot of these people, a lot of these Marwadis, to the states, to the princely kingdom of Hyderabad, because they knew how to make use of these pearls, turn them in, and use them for jewelry.
Yeah.
But come to the period of Usman Ali Khan, which is where I'll elaborate upon this anecdote. एक delegation गया था to one delegation went to Usman Ali Khan of these jewelers who were North Indians, Marwadis, Kayasts even, some of them. So they went up to they got an audience with the Nizam. They said, Sarkar, आपकी नजर जब भी आप चार मीनार जा रहे हैं, आप ये शहर में एंटर हो रहे हैं, आप पैलेस से जा रहे हैं, पैलेस को जा रहे हैं, या अपने पैलेस से निकल रहे हैं और यहाँ चार मीनार से गुजर रहे हैं, आपकी नजर सोने से you should your sight should be set upon bright nice things like sona. Whenever the Nizam, they said they basically proposed that whenever the Nizam goes towards his palace or comes from there, and with Charminar on the way, his sight should be fixed upon gold, shiny gold, and that was their way of getting shops close to Charminar. So then the Nizam then said, "Here, I'm allocating land for you people, so you can have these shops." And interestingly enough, a lot of these jewelers, as Tibarumal, Kishandas, these aren't people who came from North India from after 1947. ये निजाम के ज़माने के jewelers हैं. They used to make a lot of jewelry for nobles as well. And certain jewelers who I know of who came from Bombay in the 80s, 70s, I hear these, as with any new person in an industry, these people, these new Bombayites, they're afraid of going up against these people in competition who were there for since the 20s and 30s. So yeah.
Well, a lot of comments still coming in. Kia says, thoroughly enjoyed your talk on Hyderabad today, Danesh. Thank you very much. Anshu
Thanks.
says, congratulations, apparent, very well researched and explained. Sai Karthik says, love the session by Danesh on Hyderabad. There's one question here from Jyoti, which I'm trying to kind of, I think the meaning of the question, I think it's around the time of partition, when Pakistan tried to bring Hyderabad into its fold and the Nizam wanted to remain independent. So I think the question is more about, are there any parts of that story you feel are misunderstood or overlooked today?
Excellent question. Thank you for that. So with Pakistan, many people say that the Nizam, some people have been saying recently the Nizam wanted to accede to Pakistan. Not true. He wanted to maintain good relations with India and Pakistan. But that being said, Pakistan also wanted an independent Hyderabad because that would give a certain amount of strategic and security. It would give Pakistan a security and a strategic advantage against India. And Hyderabad wasn't the only state with which Pakistan had such designs in mind. Travancore as well. Travancore, which I believe was ruled by a Hindu ruler. They also were pushing for Travancore to be a Hindu state. But Muhammad Ali Jinnah, he was an interesting character in this saga because what he said was, and he was a typical lawyer, Muhammad Ali Jinnah. When Mir Laiq Ali, who was the prime minister at that time, who had ties with the Pakistani establishment, because he served as the emissary for Pakistan for a lot of assistance from the U.S. This was before police action. So I believe Laiq Ali himself even asked Jinnah like, what's going to happen? And Jinnah didn't really give promise of concrete promises of military assistance or anything. All he said in his typical lawyer fashion was, if if uh, if the Indian government attempts action in Hyderabad, Pakistan will not be a mute spectator. I mean, that's not really, to me, that's not really a guarantee of any help. I mean, that's basically at most you're promising, uh, you, you know, support where you just say, oh, condemnation of India, but what good does that do? And there are there are stories of Australian gun runner Sydney Cotton trying to bring in a lot of guns, but we know how that turned out. So yeah, so it's interesting. Okay, but and although Jyoti didn't ask this, even after 48, a lot of Hyderabadi professionals were migrating, although not to the effect of North Indian Muslims who went to Pakistan. They were migrating to Karachi specifically. And in Karachi today, there is a colony called Bahadurabad, which is named after Bahadur Yar Jung. So yeah, that's a interesting tidbit as well.
Nice. And last question, really, I'm going to ask you is of all the things that make up Hyderabad's history and identity, its past, its culture, its changes, what is the part that connects most deeply with you personally?
Oh wow. Actually, this might be the toughest question in the whole session. um, I would say what connects with me, this might be a bit of a biased answer because it's been the experience of my family, and I've heard many stories among similar, Hyderabadi families and friends. But what connected with me, even though I necessarily wasn't the one who toiled during this period, but what connected with me is just the revival of, Hyderabad's Muslim population economically, because the government jobs that were pretty much accessible to them, or not just accessible, but were more or less their milkiyat, their in a way they saw as their birthright, which didn't come accessible to them. Abu now Jagidari bhi chale gaye. They couldn't just survive on landed income anymore. They it's just the resilience that they had after the tragedy and how they kind of had to shed their feudal hangovers. And क्योंकि अगर आप सऊदी अरब में गए वो नवाबी नहीं चलती. The the feudal the feudal pomp and grace doesn't work in Saudi Arabia, because as it is, they're the feudal landlords. They're the quote unquote rulers, the Saudis in their kingdom. So the fact that a lot of people shed those feudal hangovers and just kept their head down and worked, and whether it was the exploitation or the discrimination meted out to them, they worked and send that money back, and that's the reason why the Hyderabadi Muslims of various stratum. I'm not even talking about the elites or even nobility that people like to focus on or exoticize a lot, but it's just that resilience which brought back, not brought back, but ensured that Hyderabadi Muslims had a presence in the commercial and to a decent extent political landscape of the city.
So I think last comment from Deepthi is thank you for this. Learned a lot about the city, which is, I think, what the aim was of this evening's talk. So I think thanks, Danesh, really for taking us beyond what I would call the postcard version of Hyderabad. I think this conversation, I think, reminds us that cities aren't just built from stone and steel. They're made of memory, language, and the stories we kind of choose to keep alive. And thanks to everyone who joined us, asked questions, listened in. We hope you walk away seeing Hyderabad and maybe even your own city in a slightly different light. So good night, and we hope to see you all at the next Khaki Talks. Thanks again, Danish.
Thanks, Ajay. Thanks, Suki.